Hey, are we live? Are we live? Are you live? I'm live. Welcome to Midas Letter Live. Barely alive today. It's barely alive. Midas Letter barely alive. I'm here with my co-host Steve Misener.
Hi, James.
Stevie. And yeah, it's another day, another fabulous day in the cannabis industry in Canada. And today we have a quite a special guest. We have Kevin Murphy, who's the CEO of Acreage Holdings. Acreage Holdings is one of the largest private U.S. horizontally and vertically integrated cannabis companies that is yet private. This company is remarkable for one simple fact. House Leader John Bonner of the Democrats is on the board of directors. This is a coup and a half. Kevin will join us in just a minute. Some other interesting developments today. We've learned that as a result of a motion passed by a member of the Senate, that the Senate debate has been adjourned and sent to the House for royal assent. So it could actually be today at some point that we are technically, thoroughly, finally through this process, and legal cannabis is a reality across Canada, recreational, medically, for dogs, cats, people, you name it. Stevie, you pointed out an interesting fact today, and that was that even while the Dow was down 400 points, the cannabis industry, and canopy growth in particular, as the darling of the cannabis industry, was actually performing very well.
Yeah, it's still flirting with its all-time highs in the low 40s, and the Dow's down for 6 days straight, mostly on trade concerns and other factors. It was down 400. I think it's bounced back to about 250 as we speak. But canopy bucking that trend shows incredible resilience, interest, and it suggests that there's brand new, fresh money coming to the space, and that the New York listing is continuing to show the pinnacle of power in terms of profile for canopy as the global leader.
Yeah, so canopy growth up almost 7% today, $2.72 higher at this moment at $43.37. That is just shy of its 52-week high of $44, which I predict it will break through tomorrow, now that, assuming it actually occurs, the Senate sends Bill C-45 for royal assent to the House for assent. And so that's probably going to be the culmination. If we look at the climb in value here that we've seen that began back in April, this strong sort of trend upward is probably a result of the market anticipating this day finally arriving. Absolutely.
There's been so much investor sentiment to follow this, that this is coming, it's coming. I don't think there's ever been a doubt that it was coming. It was just a matter of the timing. But lately, with the debates, it seemed most likely that they may not get it through by the summer recess. So
right.
Whatever has taken place today in terms of forcing it to royal assent is significant.
Mm-hmm. Other cannabis companies doing well. Aurora Cannabis is up 5% to $9.59. MedRelief is up nearly 5%, $27.88. Aphria is up 1.61% to $11.98, and that is just the best of the cannabis large cap index, with only Emerald Health showing a down dip today, down 1.45% to $4.08. And that is the cannabis large cap index, all companies trading in Canada over $500 million in market cap. All the indexes are up today, but certainly it is the main board in the cannabis space that has done the best. If we look at
it shows a continued interest in the larger cap, more liquid names, which again just continues with this theme that there's new money coming to the space, but it's the institutional money. We'd spoken about the two big banks in Canada, Bank of Montreal first, and now CIBC. There's four other big banks in Canada. When will they join the Canadian cannabis investment party and bring their retail clients? Think of it, if there's individual clients at Wood Gundy or at BMO Nesbitt who don't have any other brokerage accounts, then this will be their first exposure through their single brokers into the cannabis space. Well, what about Royal Bank and TD and National and Scotia? Is that a whole brand new, for the clients that only have one brokerage account rather than have players like Canaccord and GMB who had been the leaders, and Canaccord particularly leaders in the space? Does that mean there's just brand new investors who have been watching this and are now going to get involved? Is that fresh firepower?
Yeah. Would you say that the Cannabis Industries Canada has now got sort of a large cap and a small cap component that has truly and permanently diverged, wherein, okay, all the big banks and the funds are going to play strictly the large cap index, and all of the smaller participants are just not going to see that money, and so therefore we should see the large cap index pull away pretty decisively from the others at this point?
We are seeing the divergent trend. I mean, obviously the smaller cap ones, if we use your index at 500 million as the benchmark, and just think of it, years ago, thinking that you could actually assemble an index with a whole bunch of 500 million plus capitalization names, that in itself is quite impressive. But the smaller companies, I mean, they all aspire, everyone aspires to become a bigger player. But it shows that the fresh capital is putting a preference on liquidity and market cap. It's all interlinked.
Yeah, you bet. Do you think that the U.S. market going federally legal is going to be a catalyst, a future value catalyst?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, we've seen how important it is in Canada. Just even again from a year ago, that the prices for Canadian cannabis stocks were so low, and now we've seen what the Canadian side has done. So the U.S. one will be a huge catalyst.
Yeah, and where did our guest go? We have a guest now joining us. Kevin Murphy is the CEO of Acreage Holdings, one of the U.S. largest private horizontally and vertically integrated cannabis companies. Kevin, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kevin, so we've been following your company with interest. Up in Canada here, we've got the unicorns and the double unicorns of cannabis. Yet we've been watching Acreage come together, and it's looking like, by all accounts, it could be an instant unicorn if and when it decides to go public. Is that within your sort of plans?
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate the well wishes and, frankly, the enthusiasm. We think we've done a pretty good job here, and quite candidly, we do aspire to be one of the most dominant players in the United States as it relates to cannabis. We started this journey very early on. We were probably one of the first to be involved with cannabis, legal cannabis, on the East Coast. And I think the good news is we were early and we were right.
Right. So you've got House Speaker John Bonner on your board of directors. And I'm curious as to, A, how did you accomplish that? And is that representative of the U.S. sort of national impetus towards a federal deprohibition of cannabis?
Well, Speaker Boehner is very, very important to us. He's very, very important, I believe, to the overall industry. And the reason for that is multifaceted. Speaker Boehner has historically been a naysayer on the legalization of cannabis, but given the fact that he was the Speaker of the House here in the United States, representing the people of this country, and ultimately, and quite humbly, I was not the one that convinced Speaker Boehner that this was a good thing. I think the people of this country convinced Speaker Boehner that this is a good thing. Cannabis on the medical front, 94% of this country believes that cannabis should be available. And on the recreational front, 64% of this country believes it should be available. And so in turn, the speaker is just mirroring what the people have stated, and that is that this should be available to Americans that want it.
It's very, it's Steve Misener here, by the way. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
It is very compelling to have the speaker involved with your company, because he was a high-profile, hesitant player to endorse it. So I mean, that's just an incredible coup for your company, and it draws so much positive attention to it. We see that you're in 11 states. I mean, that's just a huge footprint. And can you elaborate on some of the challenges and maybe some of your skill set to get licenses in all those states?
I can, Stephen. Thank you. Just as an aside, we think of time here as counting days and weeks, not months and years. So we are currently now close to 15 states. So we've actually grown since that fact was last published, but it has been a great journey for us. We started in the state of Maine, learned from that experience back in 2011, 2012, and it was really from that experience we were inspired with a lot of the miracles that we had experienced there to continue with the expansion of that footprint, first in New England and then ultimately New England and beyond. We focused historically on the East Coast, but have now moved west through Illinois, Oregon, California. We believe that bigger in some respects is better in this space, because we can garner a fair amount of synergy amongst all of the different operations that we have. Again, it is a state-by-state business, but we can centralize a lot of the operations. We can centralize a lot of the accounting and legal to where we really get an expansion of margins. So we feel very fortunate and blessed to be where we are today. And again, humbly, we started very early before most, and so that is probably what's led to a large part our geographical diversity and our ultimate size.
Interesting as well that your success in 15 states, but also that you came out from the east to the west, because virtually everyone that we follow mostly come from the west, where it might be deemed to be easier. It may have been deemed to be more trailblazing to get going on the West Coast, maybe more friendly legislatively. And we discussed with an expert last week about how companies that can get licensed in the tougher states actually prove maybe a stronger skill set in achieving those licenses in the more difficult eastern states.
We started.
Kevin, sorry, can I ask you, are you planning to go public in Canada?
We are. We believe accessing the public markets gives us great optionality. For us, taking a company public really doesn't equate to a monetization of our business. It really helps us create more options in which to expand our operations. So, and yes, Canada has been very welcoming, and it's to some degree a little bit sad given the fact that we sit here in the United States, with our Schedule 1 drug, cannabis. The Israelis are leading the research. The English are receiving indications from the FDA that they'll get approval for a cannabis-derived drug. And frankly, the Canadians are leading the capital markets. And we couldn't be more pleased and proud to list in Canada because, frankly, we go where we're welcome. And today in the United States, we are welcome in 30 states, but there are 20 states that we are not welcome, and we won't participate in those states until we are welcome. So, again, grateful to the Canadians to invite us north.
Yeah, well, we're just friendly people that way. So tell us a bit about your corporate profile now. You're in all these states, but what you've got growing operations in some places, you've got growing and retail in places, you've got extraction and product manufacturing. What exactly does your sort of profile look like?
We're predominantly vertically integrated in every state. So in every state, we are growing, we are processing, and we are dispensing cannabis. There are a select few that we are not vertically integrated, such as Connecticut, Maryland, and currently Ohio. We do plan to be and aspire to be vertically integrated in every state that we operate. And the purpose for that is simply we'd like to control the entire experience from seed to dispensary. And so that's, from our vantage point, the ultimate. But we had to start somewhere in these various states and developing some bit of a footprint, and then building from there will be the ultimate goal in where we are currently not vertically integrated.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. How would you compare your sort of presence in the public space to a company like MedMen, who has this reputation for Apple-like stores?
Well, kudos to Adam. I know him well, and a very, very good guy, and certainly a very strong competitor. We have admiration for the fact that he has really been a media darling and has done a very, very good job of going out and, quote, telling his story. We, in turn, have done quite the opposite. We had initially started in Maine and then moved to Connecticut and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and now 15 states, but we had done it quietly. Our goal was to really do it in stealth mode to create one of the largest footprints we could. And then ultimately, as we had seen the social buy-in for cannabis over that period of time that we built this organization, now that we've gone to such a really an incredible number of this country that believe that cannabis should be available, again, 94 for medical, 64 for adult use, it's now time for us to take the footprint that we have and really have essentially 15 flags in 15 states under one national brand. So it's taken us about 8 years to become an overnight success, but we, in turn, believe that that was really the best way for us to quietly and frankly most efficiently build our organization. So we actually did quite the opposite of MedMen.
Kevin, it's interesting that you use the word stealth when you're telling about how you built this company quietly in the private market sense for 8 years, and then now you'll be coming out with such a massive national footprint. I think that will appeal to investors in a great way. Can you share with us, because I'm not expert in some of the other players in the U.S., can you share with us anyone else who has that kind of 15-state footprint that you're aware of?
I don't believe there's anyone that is quite 15 states. I do believe that there are others that are aspiring to be as large as we are. I do think that some of the multi-state players, such as GTI, Green Thumb Industries, has done a pretty decent job. I also believe that Paliatech has done a pretty decent job. But again, I think that given the sheer size of the marketplace here in the United States, we find ourselves in the unique position that we are essentially rooting for everyone. And to have Speaker Boehner join us, one of my competitors said to me, Murph, it's really the first time that I can remember in this space that someone has done something so incredible for their own organization, but has been so impactful and so positive for everyone else in the business. And for that, I thank you and commend you for the work you've done. And that's a proud moment for us because, again, to us, it's not a zero-sum game. We rejoice in other people's success and happiness, and we're really rooting for everyone to do well because we believe that beyond economics, yes, we are going to make a lot of money in this business. We intend to, for our shareholders and for ourselves. But as I've often stated, the Lord loves a cheerful giver, and you better have a lot of money to give if you want to be cheerful. And we intend to make a lot of money. We intend to put a lot of money back into research and really helping people help themselves, such as veterans of this country and people that don't have and can't afford the medicine. We want to make it available to them as well.
Can you describe maybe the profile a little bit about how you've been able to get funding for 8 years to such a degree in the private market to date? I mean, I find that very compelling.
Well, someone once said to me, if you want to be a millionaire, start with 10. So I had some very good fortune in my life from a business standpoint. I had spent a good portion of my career in finance, having started and grown my own finance company, which ultimately was able to monetize on and had money to start in this business. When we started in 2011 or 12, virtually no one wanted to give us their money. And so we started with our own. Over the years, we have built not only a reputation, but also a track record in performing well. And that is when others had then gotten enough courage to join us in this venture. Money raising has gotten a lot easier for us over the years because I think we've done what we believe to be the right thing at the right time every turn. And we put our investors before ourselves. Every round of financing that we've ever done, we've subordinated our own shares to those investors because it's our goal, yes, to enrich ourselves. But I often say, I don't like losing my own money, but I've got a very, very hard time losing somebody else's money. And so that's the way we've done it. It's the message we've conveyed to our investors. And that is why in this last round of financing that we've just done, we were about 5 to 6 times oversubscribed for it. Because again, and don't misconstrue this as a boastful statement, I'm just trying to state facts. We try to do what we say we're going to do, and we do it with, frankly, in a compassionate and caring way.
Sure. Do you have a sense at this point on the timeline until you seek a public listing in Canada?
We would like to have this company publicly listed this fall. I think right now we're getting into the doldrums of the summer, which does afford us the opportunity to work very hard on all the things we need to do to ready ourselves to be a public company. Our listing is a little bit more complex than others, given the fact that MedMen today is in 3 states, GTI is in a handful of states. We, being in 15 states, have a much larger hill to climb, given that we have a lot more things to account for. So I believe the end result is going to pay off, but the time in which to run that race has been to some degree elongated because of our sheer size.
Well, you've done an incredible job to date. We certainly wish you the best of luck, and we'll be happy to follow your story as you come closer to getting public. Thank you so much for your time today, Kevin.
Well, you're a gentleman, and thank you both for having me. I'm delighted to share our story with you, and grateful to be a part of your story.
Great. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's quite a story.
That's an unbelievable story.
I mean, we've got now four big U.S. companies that are seeking listings on Canadian public markets. MedMen being the first, who is coming under a bit of criticism due to the super voting structure that they've elected to adopt. But so that's now, we heard from Alan Brockstein on Kush bottles,
yes,
which our friend the Wolf of Weed Street also mentioned, Jason Spadafora. He mentioned the Green Thumb transaction that just went public at an incredible valuation that Matt Bottomley had talked about the other day. Now we've got this acreage, and that's 15 states. That's just incredible.
Yeah, the compelling story of being able to come out with 15 states so that people aren't waiting for licenses, that it's all there, and to be as vertically integrated in virtually all of those states already is going to be an incredible story for investors out of the gate. I mean, it'll be interesting to see the valuations ascribed to that, but it looks quite compelling as a start.
I wonder if he needs a shell.
Everybody needs a shell.
That's right. That's right. All right, we're going to talk a bit about some of the stuff going on in the news now, just because we don't actually have another guest today, and so you're going to have to put up with Stevie and I keeping each other entertained for another 10 or 15 minutes. But there's been a lot going on in the market. So we heard from Acreage that they are going public in Canada. They're looking to go public at some point later this fall. And so if you'd like to be part of the distribution list, here's the inside of that story. You'll have to subscribe to us at MidasLetter.com. So now, did you see the news about Kronos Australia?
No, I did not.
I did not even know Kronos was in Australia, but it turns out there's an entity now called Kronos Australia, which, knowing Mike Gorenstein as we do, does not surprise us at all. But they announced that Kronos Australia had been granted a medicinal cannabis manufacturing license by the Australian Office of Drug Control Mine. And so that's pretty cool. The license permits the manufacturing of cannabinoids based on products in Australia and is required for all forms of extraction, refining, concentration, and transformation of the cannabis plant. Rodney Cox, who is the CEO of Kronos Australia, Rodney, there's a good old Australian name. We believe Kronos Australia will be positioned to service both Australian patients and export opportunities to New Zealand and Southeast Asia.
That's a good-sized market.
Yeah, that's a lot of pot smokers down there. I know the Australians love their bud. Also today, Invictus signs an LOI for cannabis sales into Germany. Another move into Germany. The LOI is to sell dried cannabis to a German importer and distributor of medical cannabis, initially committed to selling 1,000 kilograms of dried cannabis flower per annum at a price of $6.50 per gram.
It's amazing the cross-border agreements that are being signed, because initially it was skeptical that would come forward. But I mean, even in the beginning, one of Canopy's merger partners was Bedrocan, and that was bringing legal marijuana products from the Netherlands into Canada, early on.
Right.
And yesterday we talked about Paris legalizing cannabinoid cafe product, but their bud product is coming from Switzerland.
Right.
So, and now we're talking about Australia exporting and sending Canadian product into Germany. So the global web of the cannabinoid products and the THC products seems to be growing daily.
It sure does. And it's interesting because you think about it, Cannabis indica, the one strain that is associated with shorter growing periods, higher altitudes, stockier plants, more resistant to inclement weather, was basically from India. And then the sativa plant is more predominant along equatorial regions, has a longer growing season, makes a bigger plant. has a lighter and poppier high, I think. Others will disagree with that. But so we used to import all this weed from equatorial regions and from remote places like India. And now here we are growing it in places where it didn't necessarily grow before and exporting it back into those regions. I mean, it's just crazy the way legalization and humanity sort of changes everything.
Well, even in yesterday's discussion with the Wolf of Weed Street, telling about how he sees Florida as a huge, new, particularly attractive state for cannabis legalization and growth modes. Thinking about 30 years ago with Don Johnson and Miami Vice, and that they were flying the bales in from the Bahamas and Colombia into the Everglades. And now the reverse takes through. Isn't the irony incredible that they may be shipping Florida-based product into the islands someday? I mean, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, well, think about it. The first time I bought marijuana was, it was from Mexico. And the Mexican marijuana back then was loaded with seeds. It was the lowest grade stuff you could get. It was 20 bucks an ounce. And more often than not, you get a headache sooner than get high from it. And then it was Colombian. That was the primo stuff back then. It was $60 an ounce, and it was, you know, had obviously a higher content of THC. Who knows about the CBD? But then at the end of the 70s, California was the first to actually produce sensimilla, which is Spanish for without seeds, in commercial quantities, and that was the first time that you could actually buy cannabis with no seeds in it. And that was just like, everybody was like, oh my God, this was now the #1 sought after cannabis everywhere in the world. Everybody wanted sensimilla. So there was, you know, you had your Thai stick, which was some herb from Thailand. You had Maui Wowie, which was grown in Maui, and that was a sativa. And
Acapulco Gold,
Hawaiian
Blue,
Panama Red.
So I've been told.
Yeah, exactly. All right, more news. Some more news. How about some more cannabis news? Neptune, an American company that has been in the extracts business for a long time, according to our collected intelligence here, and they made essentially perfected creating nutraceuticals out of fish extracts. They've just announced a multi-year agreement with Canopy Growth to provide extracted cannabis products. Neptune Technologies and Bioresources, Inc. announced that it has entered into a multi-year agreement with Canopy Growth. Now, this is a U.S. company, comes up here, scores a deal with Canopy Growth. Amazing.
Yeah, Neptune's been around for a long time. They've had some ups and downs along the way.
But is that right?
Yeah.
You've been an investor?
No.
No. Okay. Well, so that's interesting that they, you know, how many companies have come to be cannabis companies who used to be mining companies, who used to be technology companies in the current mix. I mean, it's really, it's reminiscent of the .com era when all of the .com company, or all the mining companies that had been long suffering at the end of the 90s rushed to become technology companies based on the success of, at the time, it was all driven by more or less Amazon and Cisco systems. And then after the crash, all of these .com companies that had sprouted up in Toronto and Vancouver suddenly were rushing back to become mining companies. Yeah. So it's, I guess it's a testimony to the resilience of the Canadian venture market that we can, it's the any port in the storm mentality that actually was kind of the impetus, I guess, for settling such a savage and wild place as Canada in the first place. It's like, do what you got to do to survive has been the Canadian mantra and largely behind the entrepreneurial spirit, shall we say, for decades.
Led in the, you know, the wild west of resource development initially, and now blazing a trail here, a global trail. It's interesting, a couple weeks ago I was at a presentation by Chiron, you know, the great Colombian story in cannabis, and I met a headhunter there who specializes, their business has migrated now into the cannabis personnel space, and just meeting him for the first time and discussing how I used to call people as a headhunter in various businesses for various placements, And
you don't mean actual headhunter, you mean like an executive search individual.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah. We're not talking Papua New Guinea, okay?
I want to meet a real headhunter someday.
I think there's still some out there.
Yeah, well, bring him in, get him on as guests. Let's get him on.
So, yes, an executive search specialist. It's interesting because he said that he would call people for various businesses and leave voicemails for people all the time, and got so used to having a 10% callback rate. And he said, this is completely different now. He said, I don't even need to call people. They're calling us. That so many people want to get employed and to take their careers down a new path, whether they're pharma people or consumer products marketing people or executives with various management skills. He says the placement activity is huge, and of course all these cannabis companies are cashed up in the Canadian marketplace, and they all need motivated experts and specialists. So I mean, the marriage there is unbelievable, but that's just another unique space that's developed, and Canada leads the way.
Yeah, once again, that's fascinating. You know, there's a CEO I know of one cannabis company who was crossing the border into the United States. And the border guard asked him, where are you going? And he said, I'm the CEO of a cannabis company in Canada with operations in the US. And nobody had told the CEO that when you cross the border, you might not want to exactly disclose precisely what it is you're doing there. Anyway, so he spilled the beans. He was promptly banned permanently from the United States. The company has to find a new CEO.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we're still dealing with some of this knuckle-dragging caveman crap on the U.S. border, even while on both sides of the border, states and provinces and the whole country, in Canada's case, is rushing towards embracing, liberalization of cannabis rules. It's really quite astounding.
Little tip for anyone traveling to the States: just say you're going to a conference.
Ooh, good one.
You're not speaking, you're attending.
I always say I'm going to visit my brother, which I usually am since he lives in Portland.
Well, there you go.
Another interesting development today that I wanted to run by you, Stevie, is that New York announced today that they were going to move towards legal marijuana with an endorsement from the Department of Health. Now, I find this remarkable for two reasons. A, because it comes across as if this is big news and it's somehow groundbreaking, that the state of New York's health department has found it within themselves to endorse medical cannabis. Congratulations, New York. Really quick moving.
Absolutely.
But the study there was a study commissioned by Governor Andrew M. Cuomo that ultimately recommends that the state allow adults to consume marijuana legally. Better late than never, I suppose.
Is that down the path of recreational when you're talking about consumption, or are we still staying with the medical side?
Well, it's not exactly clear at this point, but certainly the endorsement by the health department suggests a medical, path. The path to legalization in New York is said to still face a number of legislative hurdles. For example, it would require the approval of the state legislature.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like, we're already aware of companies with operations on a dispensary basis in New York State, so it sounds like that references the path towards recreational legalization.
Yeah, no doubt. We're going to go back and look at our indexes for a moment. I want to point out some of the interesting features that have come up here that you, the audience, might want to use someday. You'll notice up here on the screen here, I have the small cap cannabis index. If you go to midasletter.com/cannabis, you will come to the index page, and there will be 4 indexes there for your dining and dancing pleasure. And one of them is the small cap cannabis index. And in this index, all Canadian listed companies in the cannabis space with a market cap between 100 and 500 million are listed. But the really cool thing is if you mouse over the symbols, you actually get taken to a full-on page with not only a chart in candlesticks that you can select the time frame for. You can see the Midas Letter coverage of each of these companies. You can also see all of their press releases with all of the paid for sponsored content that doesn't quite disclose that it's paid for sponsored content filtered out, so that you're only dealing with legitimate information from the company or from Midas Letter. What more could you need? I know, a little bit shamelessly self-promotional, but what the hell are we doing here anyways, Stevie? Also, you've got this price history graph down here, which will show you the price history for all of these dates. It's just amazing. So looking at the index of the small cap here, I'm interested to note that Organogram is up 3.23%. We're going to arrange, if you click on these headings, you can arrange the list of the companies, the constituents of the indexes according to various parameters. Click on percentage. We see that the biggest performer in the small cap space was Abcan Global Corporation, company run by Barry Fishman, who we've had on before and who I think we need to get on again soon because I hear he's making great strides forward. Stocks up 5%, up 7 cents, closed at $1.42. Namaste up 4.9%. Namaste, Sean Dollinger, probably one of the most prolific CEOs in terms of communicating with his shareholders. He has his own show every Wednesday at 4:20 about Namaste. And you can log on to his site, talk directly to Sean. I think the share price performance is a testimony to his, to the stickiness with which he sort of keeps his shareholders engaged. Invictus, who we heard had gotten into Germany through an arrangement we read earlier in the news, is up 4.38%, assuming it's on that news. International Cannabis Corporation, ICC, is a company based in Uruguay. The correct way to say Uruguay is Uruguay, especially if you're from Uruguay. Can you say that, Stevie?
I can say Montevideo, the capital.
It's actually Montevideo.
No way.
No, I'm serious. I'm sorry. And that's actually the capital of, isn't that Paraguay?
No, it's the capital of Uruguay.
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 Uruguay. Yes. American, Ben Smith. His company has been making great strides as well, laboring under a little bit of regulatory dark cloud. Ben Ward, thank you. Ben Smith is our editor. Thank you from the control room, Suzanne. Corrects me that it's Ben Ward, not Ben Smith. Ben Smith is our writer. Ben Ward, still, but the stock is hanging in there, which is interesting. The latest press release provided an update out of Malta last week that the company had intends to acquire a license in Malta. What is the population of Malta?
About 500,000.
500,000. So what would be the incentive to acquire a license in Malta?
It's a big tourist area.
Oh.
It's on the middle of the Mediterranean. Great weather.
So
9
everybody
months
goes
a year.
there is looking to party?
No, but there's a big population. There's also a big university, big student population there.
It's not like the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean?
Not exactly, no. They have casinos there, but I
Okay.
wouldn't say it's Las Vegas style.
Right. Well, we'll hope to have Ben Ward on soon.
I think it's interesting to note the index as well, that all of the indexes look similar to the large cap index, except that upturn seems to be lagging in the small caps. So you could argue that maybe the small caps and the micro caps will follow the path of the large caps. We're talking about divergence, but we're also talking about leadership.
Yeah.
And the wider the price divergence gets between the large caps and the small caps, as you often will get a cycling down the food chain to people saying, well, this is getting to a higher valuation, I can move on and shop a little down the food chain a bit. It also shows that divergence between pure retail investors, which Canadian retail investors have been very active for years and it's been very successful, and that institutional component which demands larger market cap, bigger exchange listings, more senior exchange listings, and greater liquidity. So the leadership from the large caps is a positive trend for sure. There is a divergence in liquidity and valuation, but it doesn't mean that the small and the micro caps are going to be left behind. If you follow the charts, you can see that leadership from the large caps could roll down into the mid caps and the smaller cap names.
Yeah, and that's sort of typical of what happens in any sort of bubble life cycle. So it's the large caps that get all the love, and then once they're topped out value-wise, people start to shop in the small caps.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word bubble solely, and I'd just say that in a normal cycle or evolution in an emerging industry, that people will, because they deem to be, because of its unique nature and because the revenues are have to be following the valuation, that large caps tend to go first before people move down the food chain to shop into the smaller cap names where they think there's better return. And as confidence grows, I mean, you have to be more and more confident to accept less liquidity and smaller market caps, but therein lies the greater potential returns.
Did you know one of our viewers on YouTube is asking us to talk about Aleafia, and this is an interesting story because Aleafia used to be called Cannabo, and Cannabo was a company that was focused on acquiring clinics.
Yes.
So they didn't actually grow any cannabis at the time. They were putting all these clinics together, and at one point they were responsible for prescribing $75 million a month worth of the cannabis that was sold by, at that time, the universe of, I think back then it was 40 or so ACMPR growers. But it was actually only the top, 5 or 6 that were getting the feed from Aleafia. But interesting thing about Aleafia is the CEO is the former chief of police of Toronto, Julian Fantino.
Well, you see Bill Blair in there, Mr. Fantino.
What is going on? The cops are jumping ship.
It isn't just the cops, it's the politicians. We talked about John Boehner. Well, I mean, there was a
Ernie Eves.
Yeah, there was a
John Boehner apparently is how the Americans are pronouncing
former
his name.
House Speaker. Absolutely.
No, he's still the House Speaker.
No, he's not the House
he's
Speaker.
He's not the House Speaker. Oh, that's right.
No, he's a former GOP House Speaker,
okay.
And he's a Republican.
Really? Okay, so don't listen to me when it comes to U.S.
And he's
politics.
Not a senator. He's a Republican, former Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Before Ryan, but. I mean, there's a cynical story I read a few weeks back, not years, and said that they can't go legal federally in the United States till all the politicians are positioned.
Well,
and we're seeing that come out because then when they're all positioned in various consulting roles and directorships, not all the politicians, but the ones that want to play, that will that play, like a profile guy like Speaker Boehner, that will lead to certainly a greater awareness and thrust to push for full federal legalization in the states.
Yeah. Do you think that having a former law enforcement officer at the helm of your cannabis-oriented company is I mean, obviously the company perceives it as a strength. Do you perceive that from the standpoint as an investor? Do you feel better about a cannabis company having a former law enforcement or politician, otherwise pillar of community at the helm of a cannabis company? Does that make you more comfortable?
I'd say I'm kind of indifferent to it because the purpose is to create profile with the name recognition, and that can come from both a law enforcement official or a politician or maybe a high-profile business person. So I think that in terms of, and there are some where there's military, retired military players. So I think it's principally for the name, personal brand recognition, but given that the legalization path is going forward for recreational, I don't think it's really requisite that you need specifically law enforcement background to push your company's business plan and mission. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly not a negative in any way. It's a positive, but I don't think it's requisite.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be a trend because we had Cash Heat in here, former superintendent of police in the United States, the CEO of GrowX, Julian Fantino, who we actually interviewed here. You can find that somewhere on YouTube. Good interview. I mean, very knowledgeable guy about the cannabis space. Looking at the chart right now on Aleafia, like look at that price spike there. I guess that's probably why our guest, or rather our viewer on YouTube, wanted to ask about it. If you look at the price spike, the last press release was announces grant of warrants to CanTrust. Oh, they've done an MOU with CanTrust. Oh, that's interesting. It's to start. Oh, I see, an exchange for starter genetics. That's interesting. That's interesting.
Well, and it's traded 5 million shares. I mean, so that's huge volume validation of the news.
Yeah. Let's take a quick look at the cannabis CSE index here. The CSE index is all Canadian companies in the cannabis space listed on the CSE, the Canadian Securities Exchange. You'll notice that Namaste is at the top here. They are not, in fact, on the CSE anymore. Last quarter, they moved over to the TSX Venture, but they're still on this index because the index is rebalanced on the last day of each quarter. So starting in July, you will no longer see Namaste on our CSE index. In the meantime, looking at some of the best performers here, Eviana Health Corporation. Are you familiar with this company, Steve?
Not particularly.
Up 17.43 cents on the day. Clearly on the news that Organigram has entered into a 26% equity interest in the company. So this is basically a proxy for Organigram in some respects, which is amazing.
Well, we've been talking about the consolidation that's going to continue to take place and how that can rejuvenate markets. That's where the larger companies with those big cashed-up balance sheets and the liquid stocks really become currency. Their shares are currency, and that they then, to expedite the expansions geographically, vertically integrated outside of in different products, that it's cheaper sometimes to buy companies than it is to take the time and the money to build. So that makes the shopping in the junior markets as an investor attractive still. So the higher the large caps go, it's still not it's not a bad thing for the small caps, because you could see more takeouts and mergers and joint venture deals.
Yeah, you bet. Here's a company that we've been following. I actually almost became an investor. I just missed it, but TGIF, Friday night. These guys are based in Vegas. I mean, what a great place to be a cannabis producer. So they're up a bit today. They announced earlier this month that they had purchased a building in Vegas to produce for a hemp processing facility in Las Vegas, and they're sort of spreading out across some of the states now. But that's one of the more interesting companies on the CSE.
It's interesting they would use the word hemp, because people aren't really using that term in the investment space so much.
Well, the hemp is referred to cannabis plants that are grown for either the fiber,
yes,
or strictly for CBD.
Okay.
So hemp, by definition, does not contain active amounts of THC.
Okay.
And that's why there's some discrepancy. So typically when you see the word hemp mentioned in a press release, it's either indicative of their intention to use the plant that they're growing for either fiber purposes, which could be paper, which could be clothing, which can be ropes, can be a lot of things.
Which investors aren't really interested in.
Well, not necessarily. I would draw your attention to the 1800s, when hemp growth was actually the anchor, the rock on balance sheets of some companies back in the 1800s.
Of course, but it doesn't have the current sex appeal, and it's not what investors are seeking.
True.
Now that you've mentioned the history, I have to give you my brief dissertation of why I think that I've read why marijuana, cannabis became illegal in the United States in the first place.
Ooh, okay.
In the 1920s, the big newspaper companies in the U.S., rich guys who I will not name, Because I don't know if it's litigious now. No, after 100 years, I can't say. But the big newspaper guys, the barons, they were vertically integrating their newspaper business. And newspaper was the mass media of the day, with obviously limited, perhaps even prior to radio's penetration. Mm-hmm. They bought lots of forest products, land, and timber stands in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington State, and the black spruce is the #1 fiber product to make newsprint, and so they were ready to go. They were vertically integrated, and their business was fine. But then hemp product was coming in from foreign sources, and the threat was to actually start growing hemp. To your point, that it was in widespread use for rope and fiber in the 1700s, in all the Navy ships, all the sailing ships, and the 1800s and the 1900s. Well, the danger that hemp represented to the newsprint business, to all that forestry in the Northwest, needed to be stopped. So how do you do that? You lobby Washington to make hemp illegal as a drug, and you sponsor films like Reefer Madness, where it's going to make you jump off buildings and other crazy things. And so that's, in my mind, what I've read, the theory that I think is compelling, why cannabis plants became illegal in the 1920s and 30s and stayed illegal till this day. And it had nothing to do with the effects of THC on the human mind.
That's an interesting perspective, Steve. And in this environment, we examine all perspectives with an open mind. So, interesting. On the cannabis or the hemp versus the hemp rope issue again, there was some discussion that there's a lot of theory, and some are going to castigate me and say it's not theory, it's the truth, that DuPont, who co-underwrote the original production of Reefer Madness, was interested in achieving a national ban on all hemp cultivation to coincide with the invention of nylon rope, which DuPont had invented. And so DuPont was looking to displace the hemp rope dominance of the industry at the time through the support of anti-hemp or cannabis measures and educational, well, let's call them what they are, essentially propaganda pieces against hemp, because they were trying to, create and protect market share for nylon rope.
I like that theory. I'm going to argue, but we now need to dig into this, not today, but I think that the nylon was invented a little later, like it became, I think, a World War II invention rather than a 1920s invention. So in that sense, we need to align, but you could easily see them piling on to this great wagon to stop
Suzanne
hemp.
is in the control room in front of the Googleizer, and she is going to Google for us right now, please, Suzanne. When was the hemp rope, or when was the nylon rope actually available or invented or first produced? There's a quick mission for the control room now. We've got 4 minutes left, Stevie, of this incredible session where you and I have managed to just basically blab and blab and blab about cannabis and hemp. There's still an audience. I don't know what is wrong with these people. Clearly they have nothing to do. I suspect they're consuming some of the product about which we speak so voluminously. And somebody is asking if we have any thoughts on Choom Holdings. Now, this is interesting because I happen to know Chris Bogart, who's the CEO and one of the founders of Choom Holdings, and he is one stalwart individual. In terms of persistence and ability to spread the word about the merits of a company, I know of no other gentleman on the planet to whom I would rather entrust such a mission. But other than that, I don't know anything about Choom. Aurora put in $7 million of the $10 million they raised in the last placement. Big vote of confidence from Aurora there. And that's all I know. I can tell you that we're going to have Chris Bogart in here the next time he gets his sorry bum into this city, because he owes us an interview. That's what I say. Stevie, you know, it's 4:27, so we missed our 4:20 moment to actually fire up our, you know, free samples from all of these marijuana companies that we interview. But, oh, wait, that's because as of this moment, it's still not legal in Canada. So, no, we won't be smoking some of our free samples for you, the audience, anytime soon.
In fact, there are no free samples, so let's be clear about that.
Oh, that's right. There are no free samples. These are not the droids you want. You want to go and rethink your life. No, there aren't free samples. We have to get them prescribed to us. One last question from our very active viewer, Freedom Unleashed, who thinks I rock, by the way. You rock too, I'm sure. But he knows a thing or two about the TGIF. Former CEO David Stadnick is starting a new company, going to be public soon, called The Weekend Unlimited. And interestingly enough, on Thursday this week, Freedom Unleashed, we are going to have the CEO of The Weekend on this very show to talk about when they go public. Cody Corubia, who I actually happened to enjoy a glass of wine with down in Panama when I was there recently, but that's a whole other story. The Weekend Unlimited, I have to disclose the fact that I believe part of my enterprise is a shareholder in that deal somewhere, and so we will be talking about them ad infinitum when they do go public. Stevie, do you have any final parting words of wisdom for our cannabis consuming audience?
Well, you mean our cannabis investing audience?
Well, I think that the cannabis investing audience is at least partly consists of cannabis consumers.
Fair enough, but the investment audience is much bigger.
Well, I don't know about that. So some would argue. Everybody on Facebook and YouTube, put up your hands if you think the cannabis consuming audience is bigger than the cannabis investing audience. No, that doesn't work. Never mind. It's not. We're not there yet in the technology. We're going to leave it there for now. Please, if you enjoyed this broadcast, tell your friends, tell your mother, tell your grandmother, tell everybody. Subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button, and subscribe to our newsletter if you want to be the first to hear about private companies that are going to be going public soon in the cannabis space that you will not hear from, or hear about rather, anywhere else except here. So thank you for joining us once again. We love you all. Subscribe. Goodbye.